Well, thank you for having me here. It's funny, the patient's perspective. What is the patient's perspective on radiology? Well, it helped save my life. That's a good thing. And I'm very interested in all the images and so on. Well, here's my number one perspective on life. If you live long enough, things change. So I'm 66 years old. I tried to die 10 years ago. I failed. But I worked in high tech. And the point here is people should not be surprised when the world they grew up in and were trained in changes. This is a great chart from a company called Asimco on the adoption rate of consumer technologies from 9% to 90%. Now, this is up until I was born. All right, now things change a bit faster than that now. For instance, here's what's happened since then, and you'll notice that things got a bit more rapid in the last couple of decades. And then 10 years ago, I almost died. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And since then, look at what's happened since then. The change rate has gone freaking vertical. All right, and as a former hippie, I get to say freaking or anything I want to. I never saw an iPad before I almost died, right? And now the whole world has changed. Now, somebody with good medical training would very sensibly say, man, all that change, that Silicon Valley stuff drives me nuts. I'm going to stick with science because I know a fact is a fact. Well, then there's this book that was published a few years ago. Holy crap. Samuel Arbesman says, if you want a field where the truth stays the truth, go into math, because once a theorem is proved, it stays that way. But medicine, we can't even settle on guidelines for mammography, for heaven's sake. Well, the founder of my movement was a doctor named Tom Ferguson, real visionary from the 80s and 90s, and he coined this term e-patients: equipped, engaged, empowered, enabled. And it started back in the 90s when we got on the internet for the first time. And those followers of his in 2009 formed a Society for Participatory Medicine. Now that's my doctor and me. It's a posed photo, but he has always held the computer between the two of us because he views your medical record as being a shared working document between your clinicians and you. Well, short recap of my kidney cancer story. In 2007, I had a routine shoulder x-ray. 5 weeks from now is 10 years to the day from the time I found out I was almost dead. I'm not exaggerating. Shoulder x-ray, the doctor called and said, there's something in your lung. And it turned out that what that was one of many metastases scattered all through my body. None of it hurt yet, but it was all about to. You can even look at the mouth there. A few weeks before my treatment started, I had a kidney cancer metastasis erupt in my mouth out of my tongue. And my median survival at diagnosis was 24 weeks. Instead, 6 months later, I was all better. My treatment had ended. I got a treatment, an early immune system treatment called high-dose interleukin-2 that usually doesn't work. When it works, about half the time, it's complete and permanent. That's what happened to me. There's that same tumor 50 weeks later. And so again, as a former hippie, I'm a fan of culture change. And so when the BMJ invited me in 2013 to publish my story, I didn't go to them and say, hey, I think you ought to publish some patient stories. They said, well, here's what my oncologist said. You were really sick. I don't know if you could have tolerated enough medicine if you hadn't been so well prepared. Now, I'm going to back up here. What's he talking about there? Well, it turns out this high-dose interleukin only works in about 15% of patients. They can't predict who's going to respond, and side effects kill 4% of patients. It was my only shot at surviving, so I said, game on. And I said, how do I survive the side effects? The oncologist said, we have no advice for you. Okay, well, if I were disempowered, I would have said, okay, there's nothing I can do. That's the hallmark of a powerless person. There's nothing I can do. Instead, my primary physician, that guy, Dr. Danny Sands, had recommended me that I visit an excellent online patient community. And so I did, and I asked them, you people who've had this treatment, how did you deal with it? And I got 17 first-hand stories. And here again is what my oncologist says. He's not sure I could have tolerated enough medicine. All right, so here we have a new class of information that goes beyond the literature. It doesn't replace the literature, it adds to it. And I say to you, as in any other industry, if there is any resource that we leave unused, we must necessarily fall short of our potential. Who wants that? Well, and you know what? This was not Twitter or Facebook or anything. This was before Facebook. But this is social media before we called it that. Now, here's a great question. I'm an MIT graduate. I don't work as a physician. I don't even have a master's degree. But how can this be? Patient communities outperforming the literature. And I have gone on to become an international keynote speaker. This is what I do for a living. And I realized after several years of using this nice, warm, fuzzy social media diagram, that's what capillaries look like. In reality, social media are the capillaries through which information nutrients can travel to the point of need without centralized control. If you live long enough, things change. This is the world today. So, being a marketing guy, when I started giving speeches, I wanted cheesy slogans. So I had, hey, and if they rhyme, hey, we can perform better if we're informed better, right? And one of my primary physician's mentors, Warner Slack, has been saying this famous line about the most underused resource worldwide. Since the 1970s, he's been saying that. Well, let me ask you, many people don't want patients to have access to their information. I know radiology is way ahead of most professions in that way. But who has the most at stake with the accuracy, completeness, and availability of someone's medical data? One of my X-ray reports before cancer identified me as a 53-year-old woman. I don't think so. All right? Now, that wasn't likely to cause any harm, but and the other thing that's happening that will help you explain to your colleagues why things are so different, when assets digitize, things change fast. I used to work in the industry that made typesetting machines, and man, you want to talk about change. All right, when desktop publishing came along and fonts went digital, things changed fast. So here's an example. Okay, so here's one of my scans. I have Osirix in my Mac, so I can look at all my scan data and so on. Well, what could I do with this? Well, I could, use the 3D reconstruction and look at my tumors floating in space. I get jazzed by doing things like this. But then there's the question, well, all right, but that's cute, but what can anyone really do with it? And my point is, you never know. That's the point. Liberate the data and let people have at it. Let me introduce you to my young friend, Stephen Keating, an MIT graduate now, younger than my daughter. He was in the New York Times last year. He had a nasty tumor in his brain, and he 3D printed it, and in the process helped his clinicians diagnose what it was. All right, now don't ask me, I'm no oncologist, I don't know how he did it. Let me introduce you to Kim Goodsell. Because of access to her genetic information and the internet, she laboriously, over a period of a couple of years, hunted down the one mutation that explained the two extremely rare diseases that she had. And social change is happening for real. Harvard Business Review 1 week ago, for the first time, talking about giving patients an active role in their health care. And look what they said. I love this quote. What's needed is a fundamental redesign of the patient's role from that of a passive recipient to an active participant. Hallelujah! All these years of advocacy. And just yesterday on NPR, Sharon Terry, on her work directing, patients now are being asked to direct medical research in some cases. Finally, I'm sure many of you are aware of this device, which hardly anybody knew about a few years ago. This is an iPhone case, or Android, of course, that is a single lead ECG available for $120 on Amazon. All right, and it's FDA approved and it works. I know people whose life has been saved or trips to the ER have been saved by this device. So what we're seeing now is the Copernican revolution in healthcare. In the past, the person with a need orbited the facility. And what's beginning to happen now is that we, the people with these devices, say hello to my Fitbit, which has a snazzy, decent-looking watch now for the first time ever, right? Now we have the consumer at the center and healthcare beginning to rotate around. You see, Social media truly changes how information flows to the point of need. You know, Tom Ferguson, the founder of the e-patient movement, was the medical editor of the 25th anniversary edition of the Whole Earth Catalog. And within a year of that, he also published the first book, Health Online. And I discovered recently, I was in that book because I was a sysop of a health forum on CompuServe back then. And if you don't know what those words mean, ask old people. Stuart Brand was the publisher of that magazine, and he has this great quote: "Once a new technology rolls over, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road." And so I encourage everybody to get on board so you end up being the ones riding on top. And finally, being an MIT graduate, I'll go back to the home of Planck's constant. Max Planck won the Nobel Prize in 1918. He said this, because this is difficult, asking people to change their beliefs, does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die. All right, so you can choose which group you want to be in. Remember, lines are going vertical, folks, so you can go along with it. But the hope is that a new generation grows up that is familiar with the new truth. So getting back to the patient's perspective, help us help medicine. Here's the Facebook effect. I just posted this on Facebook a couple minutes ago. I want to see more life events, as Facebook puts it. Like, for instance, 4 years ago at Christmas, my daughter, who is a digital native, gave me the world's worst jigsaw puzzle for a Christmas present. Turns out it was an ultrasound, all right? And that was a nasty thing to do. It's funny because we did Christmas that year at my ex-wife's house, her mother, and she said she wanted to be there because she knew that I'd be speechless and she really wanted to witness that. And so that is what happened, and this is why it matters, folks. For me to be alive for this moment, everybody, no matter how bad the odds, deserves a chance, right, to make it through, to help themselves however they can. The patient's perspective ultimately is, it's great to be alive. Thank you so much.